Hello, this is Darren Pulsifer, Chief Solution Architect of Public Sector at Intel, and welcome to Embracing Digital Transformation, where we investigate effective change leveraging people, process, and technology. On today's episode, IDC Directions 2022 with special guest Dave Richard. Dave, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Darren. Glad to be here. This is going to be fun.
Now, Dave, you are our lead solution architect in public sector for Department of Defense and the intelligence community. But that's a long title. That's a really long title.
It is, but we got a team that basically solves the hardest problems and the challenges relative to a wide array of architectures that face the government. And those also translate into the infrastructure, critical infrastructure like healthcare and energy, financial, industrial, those areas. So it's been a fun time. Been playing in those spaces for 25 plus years.
Yeah. So Dave, tell me a little, this is your first time on the show. Won't be the last. Dave and I are peers. We work a lot together. You should have been on the show earlier. I don't know what happened.
I'm a slow adopter.
Oh, great. All right. So Dave, tell me a little bit about your background.
Yeah. So I'm based in Maryland, close to the government epicenter, but I've got a lot of background experience in both technical and business development across those different markets I mentioned before. So a lot of the area that I've been specializing in over the years is on edge. So things out in the hyper edge and embedded space, but also those hard problems are accelerating workloads and trying to get the most out of an architecture that translate all the way up to enterprise and cloud as well. And you and I do some work in those areas too. So it's pretty wide swath and it's fun.
All right. So recently you and I, and also Anna and Gretchen, who are our other peers, on our CTO team, we went to IDC Directions together to find out if all the stuff we've been proposing and telling the world's going to happen, to get some validation, I guess is the right word, right?
Yeah, I mean, we had the opportunity. A couple folks on our team, Scott Phillips, he heads up our analyst relations team. And then Scott Ali also heads up public sector marketing for Intel, said, hey, why don't you guys go out to the IDC survey and see if there's some value for you all. And we did. We thought there was strong value to see if their trends and the things that IDC is seeing are in line with what we've been seeing and what we've been trying to push. And if there's gaps, we want to try to understand that. So the other part was really, can we leverage IDC? Are there other services that they have that we just weren't aware of that might help us when we're trying to solve problems? So that was why we went out.
So, all right. So was it worth it then? Was it worth I mean, for you, for me, it was easy. It was in Santa Clara. I'm in Sacramento. It was a 2-hour drive. For you, it was more like a 6 or 7 hour plane flight, right?
Not bad. I mean, I travel across the country, so not a problem there, but definitely worthwhile. One, I think we got validated. I mean, you and I and Gretchen and Anna, we talked during the sessions that the things that we were seeing and the challenges that we were working on are right in line with what IDC sees. In fact, talk a little bit later, but I think some of the stuff that we were seeing maybe even a little bit ahead of where some of the IDC folks are. And that was exciting to have some side conversations with their analysts around those topics.
All right, so let's talk about what they're seeing in the future. I thought it was very interesting. They do a great job at articulating the things that we're seeing. So I thought it was insightful. So, all right, let's go through the list.
Yeah, I think they knocked it out of the park on articulating. So a couple of the folks that we got more than a couple of the folks we got exposed to was, first, they led off the whole conference with Crawford Delprit, and he is their IDC president. And so a couple other folks, we got to see Rick Villers, who is heads up their cloud, and he's a group vice president, as well as Meredith Whalen, and she does the digital first strategies. So Sandra Ung is another group vice president. She talked a bit around how the CEOs, their decision making is really changing. And then a person we got to have a sidebar with as well was Bob Parker, and he's a group vice president for their enterprise and their software areas.
So good. So I mean, these conferences are great to go to because you are talking to people, industry experts that have a lot of reach. They're talking to several thousand different organizations a year. I thought it was insightful.
It was. They went into each area in depth. So it was interesting when they started off the conference. The first thing on everybody's mind is the current events of Ukraine.
Yeah.
And so Crawford spoke to Ukraine with a lot of empathy, and the crowd was very in tune. But he also put it in perspective around this event that's happening, that's captivating everybody's attention, actually has real impact into the markets. And so he put up where IDC sees the trends going. What impressed me the most about that was just the breadth of impact. The technology demand would be impacted, just currency itself and how exchanges are done, energy markets. And another thing that I hadn't thought about was just the skill set in Ukraine on the technology sector. That's going to be impacted for a few years to come as well. So, that was on the minds of folks. He led off with that, and I thought it was appropriate to do so. Then he moved into some of the other long-term trends. The biggest one is which they set the whole conference around was digital first, and how that's impacting virtually every market and what that was. So he hit some highlights. A couple of the themes were around if companies and economies and governments are going digital first, was how that impacts scale, trust of the information, and just what the impact to those individual sectors are.
So when he says digital first, or when you say, that's meaning everything's going to be online, everything's going to be accessible, especially in government. Let's talk about that with respect to government. What does that really mean?
Sure. So in one of the other talks, Meredith Whalen went into what digital first was. And the way I summed that up from listening to her was essentially any organization, business, government, whether you're in mining or banking, didn't matter, was to take an approach that from the end to end of my entire business, how do I make digitization into an actual product? How do I turn my business into some sort of digital product? And she went into several examples around that. Part of the driving force was just the trends and statistics. One of the things that she mentioned is by 2024, there's going to be about $10 trillion spent across all markets in digital products alone. And that's forced, the consumers are changing, right? And so it's forcing what you said. What does it mean to government? That consumer shift is forcing government to look at digitization too, not just in their services, but how they look at how they approach this digitization around world trade, world economies, currencies, etc.
Well, I think that also even applies to, and we saw this during COVID, a big shift to online services. Like everyone in California knows the worst place to interact with the state is the DMV. You schedule 2 days and you're going to be sitting there because you'll never have all the right paperwork the first time you go, whatever it is. They have streamlined that in such a fast manner. I do almost everything online now. And when I do go in, it's like 15 minutes.
Yeah, it's a challenge for governments. We just got out of a conference with our state and local and education folks. And in there, they brought up this challenge that governments at the local level, all the way up to the national level, are trying to grapple with. How do I handle the fact that I've got computer networks on multiple different systems? And in many cases, they're siloed. They're not put together. The bridges don't link them together. Sign-ons are all over the place. You have to have multiple accounts. And this trend is forcing government to look at things differently, to do things along the lines of what you mentioned. Hey, make it easy, streamline, and simple.
Digital first revolution, big main wave. What's the next one that he talked about?
So it's an interesting one, and this is one where they expanded on as well. Is a flip that's occurring, and IDC called them these big flips. And one of the big flips is that with cloud computing, each CSP has their own infrastructure, and the infrastructure build isn't necessarily portable. So bridges are being built, and they talked about fungible and non-fungible assets. And in the terms of fungible, I can easily exchange one thing for another. That would be fungible. Non-fungible means I can't easily exchange back and forth between them. Just treat one as though the other. And today, CSPs are not fungible. But
Right.
the
I was going to
trend
say CSPs don't want to be fungible, right? They want you using only their infrastructure, not someone else's.
True. But what's happening is as you build out software development environments and software applications through their marketplaces, it's hard to move those across. And today they talked about CEOs looking at their CIOs and saying, hey, we've spent money on software licenses. We've spent money on software access. Are we even using it? And the big question today that IDC pointed out is consumption. They called it consumption. Are we using what we actually paid for in licenses? The trend, though, is that as we move forward, they are more focused, CEOs and CIOs are more focused on outcomes. It's not so much as we use it, did it actually produce a business outcome, a real outcome of what we want? And to do that, the cloud service provider model tends to be an inefficiency. In other words, they need groups of software together, ecosystems of software working together to deliver those outcomes, and the ability to move with different companies together in an environment and to create that outcome, because it's more than just one software package, it's multiple ecosystems that work together, is what they're looking for. As you move ahead, having multiple clouds and hybrid clouds, those ecosystems have to move seamlessly across those. And so the trend is that cloud service architectures start to become fungible, not non-fungible. So bridge builders are going to be really important in that area. And that's kind of the flip.
So that, and we've been talking about multi-hybrid cloud for some time, that we encourage our customers to make sure that they are using fungible services in those clouds, right? Because that is important, that I need to be able to move my services around. So I love that. All right. So fungibility, it sounds like a fun word to say, fungibility.
It is. It's not normal lingo, but
no, but it's becoming more because of NFTs, non-fungible tokens. Right. So we're starting to see that, right? So,
yeah,
but
that was the other flip.
I was going to say that's another flip, right?
So they brought this up, which is today's data is fungible. I can move my data around where I need to go. Of course, there's costs associated with that, but getting the data into different areas it's still in that fungible space. I can move it around and I can exchange my databases and move them in. There's some, it's not.
I can make copies of them, right? Exactly. I got several copies of my data all over, all that stuff.
So the trend is that will move with NFTs is one example. That's moving to non-fungible data. That's a big deal. So now I have an entity, a digital asset, whether it's my data, whether it's a thing that I actually own, but I have a digital representation of it for ownership. And now that data, that digital asset actually has ownership. Huge impacts for the future, for how data is handled, how it's managed. Think of the security, the trust, the business models that relate around that, and the ecosystems that have to manage. I got data entities that I have to be able to accept and attest their validity of who owns them, where they're coming from, and all the policy that goes with that.
Is there a fear that that's going to slow down data insight? Because, I mean, right now, data can freely be copied pretty much. I mean, once you have access to it, you can basically do whatever you want with it. You can copy it and then mutate it and all that, which makes it easy for data scientists, right? Because, I'm just going to take a copy of that database, run my stuff through it. And now if you're saying non-fungible data, that's a whole different beast. That's going to start building up these walls around this freeness that we have in data today.
I think it's going to be there's going to be pros and cons. It's an evolution toward it. On one hand, for the consumer, I think it puts more power in the consumer from a standpoint of privacy.
Oh yeah, that's my data, right?
Right, it's my data. I have rights to it. The amount of data that's out there about us, our own behaviors individually. If I'm a part of an organization, same thing. If I'm part of a company, same thing. That data is out there and it's being used in ways that may not be in the best interest of the individual or the organization or the corporation. So that'll help probably swing some of the influence and control to those who generate and who the data is about. But on the other side of it, yeah, if we start to have non-fungible data entities and assets, then the ecosystems of software that use that data, the data scientists that use that data, the analytics world, they have to deal with that in a much more concise and structured way. I think in the long run, and when you look out, decades out, we have to handle that. And governments are probably behind that. They're not in front of this. They're kind of behind these trends. They're moving so fast. But as government institutions and policymakers and lawmakers around the world, it's probably going to increasingly become an important part of how we handle and mix trade, not just on physical goods, but digital goods.
So this could create a whole new market for digital goods, right? I mean, yeah, I just want 1 penny for every transaction.
Wouldn't that be great?
That's all I want.
I'll take half a penny.
I guess I'm more greedy than you are, Dave.
Each way, I'd get to the point where it would be plenty.
Yeah, it would be plenty. You're absolutely right. All right. So non-fungible data assets, digital assets. I think you're right. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So what's the next big trend?
Let me give a couple trend points on this, which I took notes on that I thought was really interesting. Like, how close is this transformation? How close is digital first really? Right. And some of the things to think about are, how do you visualize some of this? One is, today we've got credit cards and a wallet, which still has our credit card, but you can start to see digital tokens coming out, which is real currency. So instead of regular currency, you have applications and communities. Think of the gaming communities where you buy tokens to get things of digital value to the users. So those digital tokens will be part of this future world relative to how apps and ecosystems use non-fungible data. The other is they gave a great example in healthcare. Today, you go into the doctor and they ask you what your symptoms are, right? And you can go online and do virtual healthcare, and they're asking for symptoms. They can see what's going on. Well, that'll all shift to real-time wearables. So now I've got real-time wearables that are monitoring my glucose levels, my heart rate, right? Changes in weight, changes in my body that are real time. That's my data. It's got to be secure, authenticated. I own it, but I can also use it for services that aren't about symptoms, but are actually tailored algorithms, tailored services in healthcare about my own personal health history and my own personal current state, what's actually happening in my body to get the best diagnosis. So, is this close? Is this real? And is it going to affect things? A couple data points. One was Meredith Whalen brought this up. She said in 2022, it was the first time that as a service spending exceeded regular license spending in IT on the cloud. So as a service is dominant as we speak this year. And then that's going to move ultimately. The trends are eventually move away from as a service to an outcome-based model. And there are companies, I've run across some companies in energy where they would supply all the energy automation for measuring, temperature, turning on HVAC systems, handling lighting, turning on and off different heating and cooling systems, all autonomous. But instead of being paid for the system, instead of being paid as a service, what they did was they built their business model around, if we save you X amount of dollars this year, we will run the system, but we get a cut of that. And that's outcome based as it is today. And so,
could you imagine if healthcare went that direction?
Oh, geez.
I mean, that's a major shift.
Keep me healthier.
Keep me healthy. I'll pay you to keep me healthy.
Right.
I'll pay you not to come into. I'll pay you not to have to come into your office. That's a major shift.
You have to do what they say, though.
Yeah, well, that's not going to happen.
I gotta exercise.
That must frustrate doctors a lot by itself, right?
Oh, it's funny. My dentist, he wants me to floss all the time, and I don't. I rinse with the mouth rinses and stuff like that. And so each time I go back, he doesn't even ask me anymore. He's like, yeah. But the funny thing is, this time though, I did start flossing, so I'm going to surprise him when I go.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
So here's a couple other data points. One, in 2023, they expect that the digital spend is going to be greater than the non-digital spend in companies.
Wow. Even like manufacturing companies?
Yep, they talked about across the board. Now, I didn't see the data broken out on each of those.
Yeah, I imagine would be different, right? I mean,
but I think at a macro level, that's where a tipping point occurs. The digital spend will be greater than non-digital spend. In 2024, the talent pool follows. So the prediction from IDC is that for most companies, the digital technical talent spend versus non-digital technical talent spend, that crossing point will occur in 2024. And it's so important that CEOs, they've noted, are starting to talk about this on their earnings calls. The fact that there's a much bigger cost for digital talent, and that's starting to impact operating.
That's very interesting, because my brain just went to the agro business, right? Agriculture. Can you imagine, a farmer saying, yeah, I pay X amount of dollars. I pay more for my IT guy over here and my programmer than I do for my farm hands.
Yeah, it's a dramatic shift. And it's affecting bottom line. So they brought up a statistic that in 5 years, over 40% of all the revenue in these fields will be digital: financial, medical, leisure, retail, and manufacturing. In manufacturing, you wouldn't necessarily think.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought manufacturing. Yeah.
Revenue would be generated out of digital products.
Wow. So they're going to sell.
Wrap my head around a little bit.
Okay. All right. So how can I apply that to public sector? Because we're in the public sector space, right?
Yep.
So there's going to be services, digital services for citizens.
Yeah.
Right?
I think they, my view is one of the areas that they show up is in input of analytic to make from public sector to make everybody dependent, from the individual to businesses, understanding what the real situation. So if I get a digital product from our governments and public sector that help make the economy run more efficiently, help make people travel through their city much more effectively. We got Google Maps today, and then Google Maps, you take a look at it, I find myself using Google Maps to find the place I want to eat. Right.
Oh, well, of course. Yeah. Everyone does that. Yeah.
Right. It's like a phone book. Right. But, and it does an okay job of trying to give me different routes throughout. But it's not quite real time yet. But as it becomes more real time, there's going to be more services around that pop out.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah. So, I think it's going to be a pretty wild time to see how that all translates. For us in public sector, security is going to be a big area. The other part on this is when you think about cloud moving to fungible, okay? These bridges, and you and I have talked about this, these bridges across from cloud to cloud make a big deal. And I think it was Rick, let me see, I think it was Rick Villers. He brought this up. And it was, the bridging between systems has to be effective and efficient. And these mesh architectures that help with control, that also help with data movement across these systems, they're not really well built right now. And it may be by design, but that's an area that is going to expand. And public sector is huge for silos. They've got separate systems all over the government, and these systems have to work better together. So,
and that's what we are hearing, right? Yeah, we're actually hearing that from our customers. They're asking us, hey, how can you help us bring our data together? Because they're kind of ignoring the systems and saying it's the data that matters. And what we heard about that at IDC was the same thing. Data is going to be the key thing, and this change to non-fungible data is a big change. This one's I'm gonna watch, right?
Yeah,
I'm gonna watch.
It'll be interesting to see how it pans out.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a ton of bottlenecks and inefficiencies in the technology of going from one environment to another, one database structure to another, one app to another. And that's an area that we know is going to have some strong innovation areas and areas that we've been working on. So it's important because when you think about the ecosystem, hey, I'm moving away from just buying a base set of software to do all my main services to, hey, what I really want is an outcome. And there may be 6 different companies and 6 different software pieces that have to work together, all with their individual piece, each with their own individual service. What I'd like to do is be able to have that across multiple clouds or across multiple platforms, even part of my own on-prem system, and be able to move easily. And the bridging that has to occur to create those more complicated ecosystem interactions for real outcome, faster outcome, lower latency relative to getting a decision and making a decision. The bridge makers are going to be really important to that. And that came out.
I agree.
And Rick brought that out in his session on cloud at IDC. All
right. Let's shift. What's another trend that they were talking about?
Yeah, so stuck out was software costs versus hardware costs. Okay. The CAGR for software will be double digits moving forward, which is 3x the hardware cost.
Oh, wow.
So from a standpoint of hardware in the system, and something that I've always been sensitive to is we have compute. People mostly think about compute from a CPU perspective. It's what 99% of the software was designed to run on, some version of a CPU. And then we have the advent of GPU. Well, that's a little bit of a different kind of compute engine. And there's also compute engines on AI that are coming into the market. There's also compute engines that are on FPGA. There's also compute engines that are going to be coming into the network. We've come out our IPU, your processing unit. What it is there's a much faster growth of heterogeneous compute engines that are going to make up for efficiencies in the fundamental infrastructure of hardware, both out at the edge and up into the cloud. And so the challenge on hardware is to get that hardware into these major systems so that compute can be universally accessible to the ecosystem of software running on top of that. And today,
even though, well, even though it's heterogeneous compute, right? I mean, well, and on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, we actually talked about heterogeneous compute and how this is starting to skyrocket. And this is where one API that Intel is kind of, they're guiding this open standard called one API for heterogeneous compute, right? So what you're saying is there's going to be a lot of hardware that's differentiated because of the different types of workloads that they can run, but the software stacks on top are still going to explode. So to make it highly accessible, we need kind of that framework layer, that one API layer.
Yeah. A while back, I was working on some use cases relative to bringing data in from sensors at the edge into the cloud. And some of that workload, some of that desired outcome was, hey, I have some motors and I got some pumps running out there, and I can monitor when fluctuations start to occur, but I need to know within a matter of milliseconds to shut those things down if there's a problem. Okay. I can't get that kind of latency through all the way through the enterprise system. So I ended up with extra systems just to handle some of these critical use cases out on the edge to respond fast enough. Okay. But if I was able to pull some of that heterogeneous technology into the cloud and enterprise environments, I might be able to do that in a way that utilizes the back-end enterprise system in an effective way. So just an example of where some of these bottlenecks occur relative to the hardware not being accessible. And today we have the ability to solve that with a mixture of heterogeneous technologies.
Okay, so Dave, was there anything at IDC that surprised you? That was like, wow, we hadn't thought of that, or we're thinking in a different direction than IDC found through their research.
So look, there's an area that stuck out that hadn't stuck out before, and that is that I think we were around it. Darren, for the most part, I felt good coming away from it.
I felt validated too. I felt like, hey,
Gretchen and Anna and you and I think we felt pretty validated that, these trends that they're talking about, we're on those and we're seeing them. It was funny, some of the conversations we had with some of the breakouts one-on-ones, I think we were giving them a bit of things to think about and giving them some real world examples of, hey, where we see what they're talking about and where it's headed. So I felt very validated. But one of the things that stuck out to me was context.
I remember that.
Data outside of context is just a data point. And I'll bring up a great example. I go out to California and I fly out there, and I'm in the jetway, that little ramp that takes you down to the plane. And on the side, just before you go into the plane, is a sign from the state of California that talks about how there's cancer-causing agents around here. Right? That's a data point. And California has those stamped all over the place, but there is no context. And it's kind of funny. And I was coming back.
We do that to scare people out of California because we don't want anyone else moving here. There's not enough housing.
Oh my gosh. If you didn't know the context, you'd be terrified, because it's data outside of context. Now, that stuck out to me because sometimes data matters, and it only matters in the right context. But if it's out of context, it doesn't matter, or it actually, worse, can distract you. And could put you on the right or the wrong path for what you're trying to do. And so when we deal with our edge systems and we deal with our enterprise and cloud and try to bring that together, what happens in these cloud and enterprise systems is a lot of experiences. There's a ton of data and there's a lot of analytics to help you give a sense of context. And when you can bring that context forward to real-time data coming in and then manage what's happening, you get much better, more efficient, more effective decision making. And the idea that moving from data focus to context focus, I think we've been dealing with that a lot, but IDC really put a stamp on that.
Yeah, I noticed that too. So and that context will help with AI, will help with customer engagement, citizen, warfighter engagement, all those sorts of things.
It really does.
All right. So hey, Dave, this has been wonderful. Thanks for coming on the show today. I know we could talk for a couple hours on all the different aspects here, but hopefully this gives people a little taste. I know there's a lot of IDC reports that are available out there. Go out there and check out our blog and our website on this, where we have some links out there for you.
Thanks, Darren. It was a lot of fun.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Thank you for listening to Embracing Digital Transformation today. If you enjoyed our podcast, give it 5 stars on your favorite podcasting site or YouTube channel. You can find out more information about Embracing Digital Transformation at embracingdigital.org. Until next time, go out and do something wonderful.